The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Willow Lane stood defiantly in the dusty main street of Promise Creek, Montana Territory, 1876, her finger jabbing at the mayor's chest while townsfolk gathered to witness the spectacle. You cannot simply take their land because they're women. The Morrison sisters have legal claim to that property, and you know it. Mayor Buchanan's face contorted with rage, his jowls quivering beneath his well-groomed mustache. The crowd grew silent as his meaty hand shot up and struck Willow across the face with such force that she stumbled backward, tasting blood where her teeth had cut into her cheek. "No woman speaks to me that way," the mayor bellowed, advancing toward her as she struggled to regain her footing. "Especially not some orphaned schoolteacher with no husband and no family to speak of." Willow's legs trembled beneath her worn calico skirt, but her green eyes flashed with defiance despite the throbbing pain in her jaw. She'd faced worse in her 24 years of life and refused to cower now. "I said, no woman speaks to me that way." Mayor Buchanan raised his hand again, but before it could fall, strong fingers wrapped around his wrist. "And no man strikes a lady twice in my presence," came a quiet, steel-edged voice that seemed to silence even the whisper of wind through the dusty street. Willow looked up to see a tall stranger holding the mayor's arm. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out the hard line of his jaw, dusted with several days' worth of stubble. A revolver hung low on his hip, and trail dust covered his denim and leather, marking him as recently arrived. "Who in tarnation do you think you are?" the mayor sputtered, trying to wrench free. "Preston Norwood." The stranger released the mayor's wrist with deliberate slowness. "Just rode in from Wyoming Territory." His eyes never left the mayor's face, but there was something in his posture that made even the burliest men in the crowd take a step back. Mayor Buchanan straightened his waistcoat, glancing around at the watching townsfolk. "This doesn't concern you, stranger. This woman has been stirring up trouble, challenging the town council's decisions." "Seems to me," Preston said, his voice low enough that people leaned forward to hear, "that in a civilized place, disagreements don't require striking women." The mayor's face flushed crimson. "You'd best move along, Norwood. You don't know our ways here." "If your ways include beating women for speaking their minds, then perhaps they need changing?" Preston turned slightly, extending a hand toward Willow, who was still tasting blood. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. "Miss?" Willow hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling fingers in his calloused palm. His touch was gentle but firm as he helped her steady herself. Preston leaned close, his breath warm against her ear as he whispered, "Stay with me. I won't let him hurt you again." The crowd murmured as Preston placed himself between Willow and the mayor. Mayor Buchanan looked around at the watching faces and must have realized the tide of public opinion was shifting. He tugged at his waistcoat again and cleared his throat. "This isn't over," he warned, pointing a stubby finger at Willow before turning on his heel and stalking away, his cronies following in his wake. Willow became acutely aware that her hand was still in Preston's. She withdrew it slowly, using her free hand to dab at the blood on her lip. "Thank you, Mr. Norwood," she said, straightening her shoulders. "But I fear you've made an enemy on your first day in Promise Creek." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Wouldn't be the first time." He looked around at the dispersing crowd. "Is there somewhere you should be? Someone waiting for you?" Willow shook her head. "I have a small house at the edge of town. I'm the schoolteacher here." She gestured toward the schoolhouse down the street. "I'll walk you home," Preston said, not as a question but not quite a command either. "Seems like you could use an ally in this town." Willow wanted to refuse, to show that she could take care of herself as she always had, but something in his steady gaze made her nod. As they walked side by side down the dusty street, she was acutely aware of the whispers and stares following them. "You're new here," she said, stating the obvious to break the silence. Just passing through, Preston replied, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Or I was. And now? He glanced down at her, something unreadable in his expression. Now I'm thinking Promise Creek might need my attention for a while. At her cottage, a small, neat structure with wildflowers struggling to grow in the dry earth of the front yard, Willow paused at the gate. Thank you again, Mr. Norwood. But you should know that the mayor has considerable influence here. He won't forget what happened today. Preston studied her for a long moment. Neither will I, Miss Lane. Willow Lane. Miss Lane. He touched the brim of his hat. I'll be at the boarding house if you need anything. As he turned to leave, Willow called after him. Mr. Norwood, may I ask why you intervened? Most men in these parts wouldn't have. Preston looked back, the setting sun casting his face in gold and shadow. My mother taught me better, he said simply, and I've seen enough injustice to last several lifetimes. With that, he walked away, his spurs jingling softly in the gathering dusk. Willow watched him go, wondering what kind of man Preston Norwood truly was, and why fate had brought him to Promise Creek, just when she needed someone most. Inside her small home, Willow pressed a cool cloth to her swollen cheek and considered what the morning would bring. Mayor Buchanan wasn't a man who forgave easily, and she had humiliated him publicly. The Morrison sisters' land would still be at risk. And now her position as the town's teacher might be in jeopardy as well. But for the first time in months, she felt something besides resignation and quiet fury. She felt hope, a dangerous, fragile thing in a town like Promise Creek. The next morning, Willow awoke to insistent knocking at her door. Pulling on a robe over her nightgown, she peered through the curtains to see Eliza Morrison, the elder of the two sisters who owned the disputed property outside town. Willow, dear, I heard what happened, Eliza exclaimed when the door opened. At 68, she was still spry, her white hair pulled back in a neat bun. Are you all right? That brute Buchanan. To think he would strike a woman in the middle of the street. I'm fine, Eliza, Willow assured her, ushering the older woman inside. Come sit down. Would you like some tea? No time for tea, Eliza said, her worn hands clutching Willow's. They've posted an eviction notice on our property. Sarah is beside herself. Sarah, at 66, was the more delicate of the sisters. They claim the deed we have isn't valid because our father left it to us rather than to a male heir. Willow's jaw tightened, sending a fresh wave of pain through her bruised face. That's nonsense. I've seen that deed myself. It's perfectly legal. But they have Judge Weaver in their pocket, Eliza said, her voice trembling. They're giving us 3 days to vacate. 3 days? That's impossible. You can't possibly— I know, Eliza interrupted. But I didn't come to burden you further. I came to warn you. Sarah was in town this morning and overheard the mayor talking with some of the school board members. They're meeting today to discuss your suitability as a teacher. Willow's stomach dropped. She had feared this, but not so quickly. Thank you for telling me, Eliza. What will you do? Willow straightened her shoulders. What I always do. Fight. After Eliza left, Willow dressed carefully in her most respectable blue dress, pinning her auburn hair severely at the nape of her neck. If they wanted to question her suitability, she would present them with a woman they couldn't possibly object to, except for her opinions. As she walked toward the schoolhouse, she noticed a familiar figure leaning against the hitching post outside. Preston Norwood had exchanged his trail clothes for a clean shirt and dark vest, though he still wore the gun at his hip. Mr. Norwood, she greeted him, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest at his unexpected presence. Miss Lane. He straightened, his eyes taking in her bruised cheek. Something dark flashed in his expression. I heard there's a school board meeting today. News travels fast in Promise Creek. Small towns are all the same that way. He fell into step beside her. Mind if I walk with you? She glanced up at him. Are you planning to intimidate the school board, Mr. Norwood? The corner of his mouth quirked up. Would that help? Despite herself, Willow smiled, then winced as the movement pulled at her bruised cheek. Probably not, but I appreciate the thought. They walked in silence for a few moments before he spoke again. I've been asking around about Mayor Buchanan and his land dealings. Have you now? Willow raised an eyebrow. And what have you discovered? That he's been quietly buying up properties all along the proposed railroad route. Willow stopped walking. Railroad? There's no railroad coming to Promise Creek. Preston's eyes met hers. Not yet. But I ran into an old acquaintance at the saloon last night. He works as a surveyor for the Northern Pacific. Says they're planning a spur line through here within the year. And the Morrison sisters' property sits right where they'd need to build a depot. Preston nodded. Information like that could make a man rich if he bought the land before anyone else knew. Willow's mind raced. That's why he's in such a hurry to evict them. The railroad must be making decisions soon. Tomorrow, Preston confirmed. Their representatives are meeting with landowners in Billings. We need to get the sisters to that meeting, Willow said, already calculating the distance. It's a 2-day ride at least. Not if we leave now and ride hard, Preston said. I have a fast horse. Willow looked up at the schoolhouse where the board members would be gathering. I can't leave now. If I don't defend myself, I'll lose my position for certain. Preston studied her for a long moment. Which matters more, your job or justice for the Morrisons? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Willow had worked hard for her position, one of the few respectable jobs available to a woman on her own. But the Morrison sisters had been kind to her when she first arrived in Promise Creek 3 years ago, alone and uncertain. Justice, she said finally. But I need this job, Mr. Norwood. It's all I have. Sometimes you have to risk everything for what's right, he said quietly. But I understand if you can't. There was no judgment in his tone. Just simple acknowledgement of the difficult choice before her. Willow looked up at the schoolhouse again, then back at Preston. If I help the Morrisons keep their land, the mayor will never forgive me, she said slowly. He'll make sure I never teach in this territory again. Preston nodded. Likely so. Willow took a deep breath. Then we'd better hurry. The sisters will need time to pack some things. A slow smile spread across Preston's face, transforming his features from merely handsome to something that made Willow's heart skip a beat. I was hoping you'd say that. They hurried to the Morrison sisters' small farmhouse on the outskirts of town, where Eliza and Sarah were already packing their few treasured possessions. We can't possibly make it to Billings by tomorrow, Sarah fretted, wringing her hands after Willow explained the situation. Not all of us, Preston agreed, but if Miss Lane and I ride now with your deed and a letter from you authorizing her to speak on your behalf, we might make it in time. It's our only chance, Willow added gently. Otherwise, the mayor will take your land, and the truth will never come out. Eliza's eyes narrowed with determination. Sarah, fetch Papa's deed from the box under the floorboard, and I'll write that letter. While the sisters gathered the necessary documents, Preston pulled Willow aside. This won't be an easy ride, he warned, and the mayor might send men after us when he realizes we're gone. I'm not afraid, Willow said, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. Maybe you should be, Preston replied, his voice low. Men like Buchanan don't like losing. Neither do I. Willow met his gaze steadily. I've been fighting men like him my whole life, Mr. Norwood. Something shifted in his expression, then respect, perhaps, or recognition. Call me Preston, he said. If we're going to be outlaws together, we might as well be on a first-name basis. Outlaws? Willow couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. Is that what we are now? In Buchanan's eyes? Certainly. Preston's smile had a dangerous edge. But sometimes the law isn't the same as justice. An hour later, they were riding hard away from Promise Creek, the sisters' documents secure in Willow's saddlebag. Preston had procured a horse for her from the livery, a sturdy mare with good stamina, and had given her his spare bedroll and canteen. They rode in silence for the most part, pushing their horses as fast as was safe over the rolling terrain. By mid-afternoon, Willow's muscles were screaming in protest. It had been some time since she'd ridden this hard, but she gritted her teeth and kept pace with Preston. When they finally stopped at a small creek to water the horses and rest briefly, Preston studied her with concern. "You're in pain," he observed. "I'll manage," Willow replied, trying not to wince as she dismounted. "We can rest longer if you need." "No," she cut him off. "The Morrisons have been kind to me since I arrived in Promise Creek. They're two of the few people who didn't look down on me for being an unmarried woman making my own way. I won't fail them." Preston nodded, passing her his canteen. "Drink. We still have many hours before nightfall." As Willow drank the cool water, she studied him over the rim of the canteen. "You never said why you were passing through Promise Creek." A shadow seemed to pass over his face. "I go where work takes me." "And what work is that?" "These days? Whatever pays." He looked away, scanning the horizon. "I was a lawman once, in Wyoming Territory. Now I do odd jobs, guide parties through dangerous country, sometimes hunt bounties if the cause is just." "A man of many talents," Willow observed. "Just a man trying to make his way without compromising what matters." He met her eyes again. "Not unlike yourself, I suspect." Before Willow could respond, Preston tensed, his hand moving to his revolver. "Mount up," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on something behind her. Willow turned to see a cloud of dust in the distance, moving fast in their direction. The mayor's men? Most likely. Preston was already helping her onto her horse. "We need to reach the forest before they catch sight of us." They rode hard for the tree line about a mile ahead, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them. Willow's heart pounded in rhythm with her horse's hooves, fear and determination propelling her forward. Just as they reached the shelter of the pines, a shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark from a tree near Willow's head. She gasped, but kept riding, following Preston deeper into the forest, where the dense trees would make it harder for their pursuers to track them. After several tense minutes of navigating through the underbrush, Preston signaled for her to stop in a small clearing. They dismounted quickly, and he led their horses behind a rocky outcropping. "Stay here," he whispered, drawing his revolver. "Keep low and quiet." Willow nodded, crouching beside the horses as Preston moved silently back toward the forest edge. Minutes stretched like hours as she waited, straining to hear anything besides the hammering of her own heart and the occasional stamp of the horse's hooves. Finally, she heard voices distant at first, then closer. "They came this way for sure," a gruff voice said. "Saw them enter the tree line." "Forest is too dense," another replied. "We could be searching for hours." "Mayor said to bring the woman back and deal with the stranger." The first voice again, cold and determined. "Said he'd make it worth our while." "Split up then. You go east, I'll head west. Holler if you find anything." Willow held her breath as footsteps approached her hiding place. She glanced around desperately for a weapon, finding nothing but a thick branch that had fallen nearby. Gripping it tightly, she pressed herself against the rock, prepared to defend herself if necessary. The footsteps stopped just on the other side of the outcropping. Willow could hear the man's breathing, the creak of leather as he shifted position. Then a muffled thud, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. "It's clear," Preston's voice called softly. "The other one ran when he heard his friend fall." Willow emerged from hiding to find Preston standing over an unconscious man, one of the mayor's deputies. "Did you—" "Just knocked him out. Preston assured her, holstering his revolver. But we need to move. He'll wake eventually, and his friend will bring others. They mounted quickly and rode north, away from the direction their pursuers had taken, pushing through dense forest until they reached a narrow game trail that wound deeper into the wilderness. "We'll have to take the long way around," Preston explained as they picked their way carefully along the trail. "It'll add a few hours to our journey, but it's safer than the main road now." Twilight was deepening into darkness when Preston finally called a halt in a sheltered hollow beside a small stream. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he said, helping Willow dismount. "The horses need it, and so do you." Willow wanted to protest, but found she couldn't. Every muscle in her body ached, and exhaustion weighed her down like a physical thing. While Preston tended to the horses, she gathered wood for a small fire. "No fire," he said when he saw what she was doing. "Too risky. They might be looking for the light." Willow dropped the kindling with a sigh. "Of course. I wasn't thinking." Preston unpacked his bedroll and spread it on a patch of soft pine needles. "Take this," he said. "I'll keep watch." "We can take turns," Willow argued, though the thought of sleep was terribly tempting. "You need rest more than I do," Preston insisted. "I'm used to long nights." Too tired to argue further, Willow wrapped herself in the offered bedroll, surprised by the lingering scent of leather and pine that seemed to belong to Preston. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as questions tumbled through her mind. "Why are you really helping us?" she asked finally, breaking the silence. "You don't know me or the Morrisons. This isn't your fight." In the dim moonlight filtering through the trees, she could just make out Preston's profile as he sat with his back against a tree, revolver across his lap. "Maybe I'm tired of seeing the powerful take what isn't theirs," he said after a long pause. "Or maybe I just don't like seeing women mistreated. There must be more to it than that." He was quiet for so long that Willow thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, but intense. "5 years ago, I was a deputy marshal in a small Wyoming town. The railroad was coming through, just like here. Local judge and mayor were buying up land, forcing people out. My own mother was one of them, had a small ranch my father left her when he died." Willow propped herself up on her elbow, watching his shadowed face. "What happened?" "She refused to sell, stood her ground even when they threatened her. One night, her house burned down with her in it." His voice remained steady, but Willow could hear the old pain beneath the words. "Officials called it an accident, said she must have fallen asleep with a lantern lit." "But you didn't believe that." "My mother was afraid of fire, never went to sleep without checking every lamp 3 times. Preston's hand tightened on his revolver. "I tried to investigate, but the marshal, my own boss, shut me down, said to leave it be. When I wouldn't, I lost my badge." "I'm sorry," Willow whispered, understanding now the shadows that lived behind his eyes. "After that, I started looking into other cases like my mother's. Found a pattern across several territories wherever the railroad was expanding. People were losing their land, one way or another." He looked at her directly then. "So when I heard about the Morrison sisters and saw how the mayor treated you, I recognized the signs." "You're fighting old ghosts," Willow said softly. "Maybe." Preston's smile held no humor. "Or maybe I'm just trying to make sure what happened to my mother doesn't happen to anyone else." They fell silent then, the quiet of the forest surrounding them. Willow watched Preston until her eyelids grew too heavy to keep open, finally drifting into an uneasy sleep filled with dreams of fire and pursuit. She woke to Preston's hand on her shoulder and the gray light of pre-dawn filtering through the trees. "We need to move," he said quietly. "Still have a long ride ahead if we're going to reach Billings by afternoon." They ate a quick breakfast of jerky and hardtack from Preston's provisions, then mounted and continued their journey. The terrain grew more challenging as they avoided the main trails, But Preston navigated with the confidence of someone accustomed to the wilderness. By mid-morning, they had left the forest behind and were crossing open country again, the distant smudge of Billings visible on the horizon. They rode side by side now, the immediate danger of pursuit seemingly behind them. "What will you do if this works?" Preston asked as they urged their tired horses forward. "Buchanan won't welcome you back to Promise Creek." Willow had been pondering this very question through the long hours of their journey. "I don't know," she admitted. "Teaching is all I've ever wanted to do. But there are other towns, other schools." "You could go east," Preston suggested. "Cities like Denver or even Chicago have more opportunities for educated women." "Perhaps." Willow glanced at him. "What about you? After this is finished?" Preston shrugged. "Move on, I suppose. Find another wrong to right." "That sounds lonely." "It can be." His eyes met hers briefly. "But it's the life I've chosen." "Or the life that's chosen you," Willow observed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Maybe so." They reached Billings shortly after noon, the town bustling with activity. The railroad meeting was being held at the Grand Hotel, an imposing two-story structure that dominated the main street. Willow felt suddenly conscious of her travel-worn appearance as they dismounted in front of the hotel. "Wait," Preston said, reaching into his saddlebag. He pulled out a clean bandana and dampened it with water from his canteen. "Your face." Willow touched her cheek self-consciously, realizing she must look a fright after their hard journey. She accepted the bandana gratefully, using it to wipe away the worst of the dust while Preston secured their horses. "Ready?" he asked when she'd done her best to make herself presentable. Willow nodded, squaring her shoulders. "As I'll ever be." The hotel lobby was crowded with men in business suits, their conversations creating a buzz of excitement. Preston approached the front desk, his presence commanding enough that the clerk looked up immediately. "We're here for the Northern Pacific meeting," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his former lawman days. "Miss Lane represents property owners along the proposed route." The clerk looked dubiously at Willow's disheveled appearance, but directed them to a meeting room on the second floor. As they climbed the stairs, Willow felt a tremor of nervousness. "What if they won't listen to me?" she whispered. Preston's hand touched the small of her back briefly, steadying her. "They'll listen. You're not just speaking for yourself now." The meeting room was filled with men in expensive suits gathered around a large map spread across a table. A distinguished gentleman with silver hair was pointing to various locations, while others nodded and made notes. "Gentlemen," Preston's voice cut through the murmur of conversation, "I believe you have one more property to consider." All heads turned toward them. Willow felt the weight of their stares but lifted her chin and stepped forward. "My name is Willow Lane," she said, her voice clearer and stronger than she expected. "I represent Eliza and Sarah Morrison, owners of the property you've marked for the Promise Creek Depot." A murmur ran through the assembled men. The silver-haired gentleman, evidently the leader, studied her with sharp eyes. "The Morrison property is not on our acquisition list," he said. "According to our information, that land is being sold to us by Mayor Buchanan of Promise Creek." "Mayor Buchanan does not own that land," Willow stated firmly, pulling the deed and Eliza's letter from her bag. "These documents prove the Morrisons' ownership. The mayor has been attempting to force them off their property through illegal means." The silver-haired man, who introduced himself as Mr. Ellsworth, the railroad's chief of acquisitions, examined the documents carefully. Several other men gathered around, murmuring as they verified the deed's authenticity. "This appears to be in order," Mr. Ellsworth said finally. "But Mayor Buchanan assured us he had legal claim to this property. He's been negotiating with us for weeks." "He lied," Preston said bluntly. "He's been trying to evict the rightful owner's two elderly sisters so he could sell their land to you at a profit." Mr. Ellsworth's expression darkened. Northern Pacific does not condone such methods. We pride ourselves on fair dealings with all property owners. Then I suggest you deal directly with the Morrisons, Willow said. They are willing to sell at a fair price, but they deserve to be treated with respect and honesty. Of course, Mr. Ellsworth nodded. We can draft an offer immediately. The sisters would receive payment directly, with no intermediaries. Relief washed over Willow. They had done it, the Morrisons would get fair value for their land, and Mayor Buchanan's scheme was exposed. As the railroad officials drafted the necessary paperwork, Preston guided Willow to a quiet corner of the room. "You did it," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "We did it," Willow corrected him. "I couldn't have gotten here without your help." Something shifted in Preston's expression, then a softening around his eyes, a warmth that made Willow's heart beat faster. "You would have found a way," he said. "You're not a woman who gives up easily." Before she could respond, Mr. Ellsworth approached with documents in hand. "Miss Lane, if you would review these terms. Once you're satisfied, you can take them back to the Morrison sisters for their signatures. We'll send representatives to finalize the transaction next week." The offer was more than fair enough money for the sisters to live comfortably for the rest of their lives. Willow signed as their representative, her hand steady despite her exhaustion. As they left the hotel, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, Willow felt a strange mixture of triumph and uncertainty. They had won this battle, but she still faced the reality of her situation. "We should find rooms for the night," Preston said, as they walked toward their horses. "It's too late to start back, and we both need rest." Willow nodded, suddenly conscious of how improper their situation might appear to others. As if reading her thoughts, Preston added, "I'll arrange separate accommodations, of course." "Of course," Willow echoed, ignoring the small pang of disappointment she felt. They found lodging at a modest boarding house near the edge of town, where the landlady, a practical woman named Mrs. Winters, seemed untroubled by their travel-worn appearance. After a hot meal and a bath, luxuries that felt almost decadent after their journey, Willow found herself restless despite her fatigue. She made her way to the small parlor downstairs, surprised to find Preston there, staring thoughtfully into the fireplace. He rose when she entered, ever the gentleman despite his rugged exterior. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked as she took a seat in the armchair opposite his. "Too many thoughts," she admitted. "Tomorrow we return to Promise Creek with news that will destroy Mayor Buchanan's plans. He won't take that lightly?" "No, he won't," Preston agreed. "But the Morrison sisters will be protected by their agreement with the railroad. As for you," he hesitated, "you could stay here in Billings, start fresh, and leave the sisters to face the mayor's wrath alone?" Willow shook her head. "I can't do that." "I didn't think you would." A smile touched Preston's lips. "It's not in your nature to abandon those who need you." "What about you?" Willow asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Will you continue on your way once we return?" Preston was quiet for a moment, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I hadn't planned to stay in Promise Creek. But I find myself reluctant to leave." He leaned forward slightly. "There are still wrongs to right there, and people worth protecting." The way he looked at her made Willow's breath catch. For a moment neither spoke, the crackling of the fire the only sound in the room. "We should get some rest," Preston said finally, breaking the spell. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Willow nodded, rising from her chair. "Good night, Preston." "Good night, Willow." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Willow found herself wondering what it would be like if Preston Norwood decided to stay in Promise Creek, and what it might mean for her. They set out at dawn the next morning, taking the main road this time. Preston reasoned that with the railroad deal secured, Mayor Buchanan had lost his leverage, making a direct confrontation less likely. Still, they rode vigilantly, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. The journey back seemed shorter somehow, filled with conversation that ranged from their childhoods to their hopes for the future. Willow learned that Preston had grown up on a small ranch in Colorado, the son of a former cavalry officer turned rancher and a schoolteacher mother. His father had died when Preston was 16, leaving him to help his mother run the ranch until he was old enough to pin on a deputy's badge. In turn, she told him about growing up in an orphanage in St. Louis, where a kind headmistress had recognized her intelligence and arranged for her education. Teaching had been her ticket west, away from the confines of Eastern society and its limited opportunities for women without family connections. "We're both orphans of a sort," Preston observed as they stopped to rest the horses beside a clear stream. "Maybe that's why we recognize something in each other." "What do you recognize in me?" Willow asked, curiosity overcoming propriety. Preston considered her, his gaze thoughtful. Determination, independence, a willingness to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. His voice softened. "And a loneliness you try to hide." Willow looked away, unnerved by how accurately he had read her. "And what do I recognize in you, Mr. Norwood? You tell me." She met his eyes again. "A good man carrying too many burdens. Someone who fights other people's battles because he couldn't win his own. A wanderer looking for something to anchor him." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Seems we have each other's measure, then." "Perhaps we do," Willow agreed, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. They reached Promise Creek late the following day, the town quiet in the gathering dusk. Preston suggested they go directly to the Morrison sisters' home to deliver the good news, avoiding the town center where they might encounter the mayor or his men. The sisters greeted them with tearful embraces, ushering them inside where a lamp burned low in the window, a beacon they had kept lit in hope of Willow and Preston's return. "We've been so worried," Eliza said, her weathered hands clasping Willow's. "When we heard the mayor had sent men after you." "We're fine," Willow assured her, producing the railroad's offer from her bag. "And we have wonderful news." The sisters wept with joy and relief as Willow explained the terms of the agreement. They would receive more money than they had ever imagined possible, enough to buy a comfortable home in town and live without financial worry for the rest of their days. "This is your doing," Sarah said, embracing Willow again. "You risked everything for us." "Preston deserves equal credit," Willow replied, glancing at him where he stood quietly near the door. "He's the one who discovered the mayor's scheme and got us safely to Billings." "Then we are in your debt as well, Mr. Norwood," Eliza said, turning to include him in their circle of gratitude. "Please, both of you must stay for supper. It's the least we can offer after all you've done." Despite their exhaustion, Willow and Preston accepted the invitation, helping the sisters prepare a simple but satisfying meal. As they ate, Willow realized how much this felt like a family gathering, something she had experienced rarely in her life. She glanced at Preston across the table and found him watching her, a similar realization seeming to dawn in his eyes. After the meal, as they prepared to leave, Eliza pulled Willow aside. "What will you do now, dear?" "The mayor will be furious when he learns what's happened." "I'll face whatever comes," Willow said with more confidence than she felt. "Perhaps the school board will reconsider once they know the truth about the mayor's dealings." "And if they don't?" Sarah asked worriedly. "Then I'll find another position elsewhere." Willow squeezed the older woman's hand reassuringly. "Don't worry about me." Outside, in the cool evening air, Preston offered to walk Willow home. They moved quietly through the darkened streets, alert for any sign of trouble. "The mayor will know by morning that we've returned," Preston said as they approached Willow's small house. "He'll also learn soon enough that his railroad scheme has failed." "Do you think he'll retaliate?" Willow asked, unlocking her front door. Preston's expression was grim in the moonlight. Men like Buchanan don't take defeat well. You should be prepared for anything. Willow nodded, stepping into her doorway. Will you? She hesitated, then gathered her courage. Will you stay in Promise Creek a while longer? Until I'm sure you're safe, Preston promised. His eyes held hers for a long moment before he added softly, Get some rest, Willow. Tomorrow may be difficult. Good night, Preston, she said, reluctant to close the door between them. Good night. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that had become familiar and somehow comforting, before turning to walk back toward town. Willow watched until his figure disappeared into the darkness, then closed her door with a sigh. Her home felt smaller and emptier than she remembered, as if something essential was missing, or perhaps as if she had changed in some fundamental way during her journey. The next morning, Willow dressed with particular care, choosing her most formal teaching attire. If she was to face the school board, and possibly the mayor, she wanted to present herself with dignity. She had just finished pinning up her hair when a knock sounded at her door. It was Preston, his expression grave. Mayor Buchanan received a telegram from the railroad this morning, he said without preamble. He's calling for an emergency town meeting at noon. To address his failure? Willow asked, surprised. To address what he's calling treasonous interference with town progress, Preston replied. He's naming you specifically. Willow felt a chill despite the warm morning sun. He means to turn the town against me. That appears to be his intention. Preston's hand moved instinctively to his revolver. I don't think you should attend that meeting. If I don't go, I'll appear guilty, Willow argued. Besides, the truth is on our side. The railroad's agreement with the Morrisons proves the mayor was acting dishonestly. Preston didn't look convinced, but he nodded. Then I'll be right beside you. They spent the morning preparing, gathering supporting documents and planning what they would say. As noon approached, they walked together to the town hall, where a crowd had already gathered in the dusty street outside. The murmur of conversation died as they approached, faces turning to stare at Willow with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. She straightened her spine and kept walking, Preston a steady presence at her side. Inside the hall, Mayor Buchanan stood on a small platform at the front of the room, his face flushed with barely contained rage. He pointed a finger at Willow as she entered. There she is, he bellowed, the woman who has sabotaged the future of Promise Creek. The crowd shifted and muttered as Willow and Preston made their way toward the front. Willow could feel hostile eyes on her back, but kept her gaze fixed on the mayor. I've done nothing of the sort, she said clearly when they reached the open space before the platform. I've simply ensured that honest citizens receive fair treatment. You interfered with official town business, the mayor sputtered. You prevented a deal that would have brought prosperity to Promise Creek. A deal that would have lined your pockets at the expense of 2 elderly women, Preston interjected, his voice carrying throughout the hall. A deal based on theft and intimidation. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Mayor Buchanan's face darkened further. Who are you to make such accusations? A drifter, a nobody. I'm someone who recognizes corruption when I see it, Preston replied evenly. And the Northern Pacific Railroad recognizes it too. That's why they've made a direct deal with the Morrison sisters, the legal owners of the land you tried to steal. A buzz of surprise ran through the assembled townsfolk. The mayor looked around frantically, seeing the shift in his audience. These are lies, he insisted. Miss Lane has turned this stranger against our town, against progress. The only one against progress is you, Mayor, Willow said, stepping forward. Progress built on dishonesty benefits no one but yourself. From the back of the room, a new voice spoke up. She's right. Heads turned to see Mr. Ellsworth from the railroad standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 other businessmen. Northern Pacific does not conduct business with those who would defraud legitimate property owners. The mayor's face went from red to ashen as Mr. Ellsworth approached the front of the room. Miss Lane and Mr. Norwood brought evidence of your scheme to our attention, Mayor Buchanan. Evidence we've since verified independently. This is outrageous, the mayor stammered, his confidence visibly crumbling. I was acting in the town's best interest. By attempting to evict two elderly women from their legal property? By striking a woman who dared to question you? Preston's voice was cold with controlled anger. Those actions serve no one's interest but your own. Mr. Ellsworth cleared his throat. Mayor Buchanan, Northern Pacific will still bring the railroad through Promise Creek. The depot will be built on the Morrison property, as planned. But we will deal directly with the sisters, not through you or the town council. A cheer went up from several people in the crowd, those who had long suffered under the mayor's heavy-handed rule. Others looked confused or concerned, uncertain what these revelations meant for the town's future. Furthermore, Mr. Ellsworth continued, in light of these events, Northern Pacific will be establishing an oversight committee of respected citizens to ensure fair treatment of all affected property owners. Miss Lane has been asked to serve on this committee, given her demonstrated commitment to justice. Willow felt a surge of surprise and gratitude. This was more than she had hoped for, not just vindication, but an opportunity to ensure that others weren't victimized as the Morrisons had nearly been. Mayor Buchanan seemed to shrink before their eyes, his bluster giving way to desperate calculation. This is irregular, he managed finally. The town council should have final say in. The council will vote on a new mayor at its next meeting. One of the councilmen interrupted, standing up from his seat. Given these revelations, I believe your leadership is no longer appropriate, Buchanan. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that accusations flying, old grievances being aired, alliances shifting before their eyes. In the midst of it all, Preston touched Willow's elbow gently. I think we've done what we came to do, he said quietly. Perhaps we should let them sort out the rest. Willow nodded, suddenly exhausted by the confrontation. They slipped out a side door while attention was focused on the arguing council members and the disgraced mayor. Outside, the afternoon sun felt cleansing after the stuffy tension of the town hall. They walked in companionable silence toward the edge of town, finally stopping at a small park where a few benches overlooked the valley below. You'll keep your teaching position now, Preston said as they sat side by side, and have a new role with the railroad as well. It seems I will, Willow agreed, still marveling at the turn of events. Though I'm not sure how the parents will feel about their children being taught by a woman who helped overthrow the mayor. Preston smiled. Based on what I saw in there, quite a few of them will consider it a recommendation. Willow laughed, the sound surprising her after the tension of recent days. Perhaps you're right. She turned to look at him directly. What about you, Preston? Will you be moving on now that this is resolved? The question hung between them, weighted with all they had experienced together and all that remained unspoken. Preston looked out over the valley, his profile strong against the afternoon light. I've been thinking about that, he said finally. I've spent 5 years drifting from town to town, fighting other people's battles, never staying long enough to put down roots. And now? Willow prompted when he fell silent. Preston turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Now I'm wondering if maybe I've found a place worth staying. And people worth staying for. Willow's heart quickened. Promise Creek could use a man with your sense of justice, she said carefully. Especially now, with changes coming. Is that the only reason I should stay? Preston asked softly. Gathering her courage, Willow reached out and placed her hand over his. No, she whispered. It isn't. Preston's fingers intertwined with hers. Warm and strong. When I saw Buchanan strike you that day, he said, his voice low with emotion. Something in me that had been dormant for years came alive again. Not just anger at the injustice, but a need to protect, to stay, to see what might grow between us. I've felt it too, Willow admitted. This connection, this possibility. Preston lifted their joined hands, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then perhaps it's time I stopped wandering and found out where this path might lead. In the days that followed, Promise Creek underwent a transformation. Mayor Buchanan resigned in disgrace, and a special election installed Mr. Harrison, the town's respected blacksmith, as the new mayor. The railroad began preliminary work on the spur line, bringing new jobs and opportunity to the town. The Morrison sisters moved into a comfortable house in town, using part of their payment from the railroad to establish a small lending library, something Willow had long advocated for. She continued teaching at the school, now with the full support of the board, while also serving on the railroad's oversight committee. Preston, to the surprise of many but the delight of Willow, accepted a position as the town's new marshal. His reputation as a former lawman and his role in exposing the mayor's corruption made him the natural choice when the previous marshal, a Buchanan loyalist, departed. Their courtship progressed with a blend of propriety and passion that reflected their unique circumstances. They had already shared dangers and confidences that most couples might never experience, creating a foundation of trust and mutual respect that deepened with each passing day. On warm evenings, they would often walk together at the edge of town, discussing the day's events or simply enjoying each other's company. It was during one such walk, 3 months after their confrontation with the mayor, that Preston stopped beneath an old oak tree and turned to Willow with uncharacteristic nervousness. "I've been carrying something with me for a few weeks now," he said, reaching into his pocket, waiting for the right moment. Willow's heart fluttered as he withdrew a small velvet box. "Preston." He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver ring set with a small but perfect sapphire. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "One of the few things I saved from the fire. She always said it should go to the woman I chose to build a life with." Tears sprang to Willow's eyes as Preston took her hand. "Willow Lane," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "You are the bravest, most principled woman I've ever known. You fought for justice when it would have been easier to stay silent. You risked everything for what was right." He drew a deep breath. "I love you for that courage, and for the gentle heart that guides it. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Willow whispered without hesitation, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Preston Norwood, I would be proud to be your wife." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she added with a smile, "Though I must warn you, I'm likely to keep speaking my mind, even when it's inconvenient." Preston laughed, drawing her into his arms. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said, before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership, respect, and love. They were married that autumn in a ceremony attended by the entire town. The Morrison sisters decorated the church with wildflowers and hosted the celebration afterward in their garden. Mr. Ellsworth came from Billings to represent the railroad, bringing news that Preston had been offered a position as security consultant for Northern Pacific, a role that would allow him to continue as marshal while providing additional income for their future. As the sun set on their wedding day, Preston and Willow slipped away from the festivities to share a moment alone. Standing on the porch of what was now their home, Willow's small house expanded and improved. With Preston's skilled hands, they looked out at the town that had brought them together. "Did you ever imagine, when you stepped between me and the mayor that day, that we would end up here?" Willow asked, leaning against her husband's solid strength. Preston's arm tightened around her waist. "I knew from that first moment that you were someone special," he admitted, "though I couldn't have predicted just how completely you would change my life." "You changed mine too," Willow said softly. "You showed me that standing up for what's right doesn't have to be a lonely battle." "It never will be again," Preston promised, turning her to face him. Whatever comes, we face it together. As their lips met in a tender kiss, Willow knew that they had both found what they had been searching for, not just justice or purpose, but a love that would anchor them through whatever challenges lay ahead. In each other, they had found not only a partner, but a home. The years that followed brought both joy and challenge to Preston and Willow Norwood. Promise Creek grew with the arrival of the railroad, transforming from a sleepy town into a bustling community. The Morrison sisters' lending library expanded into a proper town library, with Willow overseeing its development alongside her teaching duties. Preston's dual role as town marshal and railroad security consultant kept him busy but fulfilled. He took particular satisfaction in establishing a fair and just approach to law enforcement, something Promise Creek had lacked under the previous administration. Their greatest joy came with the birth of their daughter, Eleanor, named for Preston's mother. A year later, they welcomed a son, James. The children grew up surrounded by love and taught by example the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. On the 5th anniversary of their first meeting, Preston surprised Willow with a deed to a small ranch outside of town, a place where their children could grow up with the freedom of open spaces while remaining close to the community they loved. "I thought we agreed the house in town was sufficient," Willow said, as they stood on a hillside overlooking their new property. "It was," Preston admitted, his arm around her shoulders. "But I wanted our children to have what I had growing up: room to roam, horses to ride, a connection to the land." Willow leaned against him, watching Eleanor and James chase butterflies in the meadow below. "It's perfect," she said softly. "A place where we can all put down deep roots." "That's what I thought." Preston turned her to face him, his eyes as warm and steady as they had been the day he first took her hand in Promise Creek's dusty street. "When I came to this town, I was still running from the past. You gave me a reason to stay, to build something lasting. And you gave me the courage to keep fighting for what matters," Willow replied, reaching up to touch his face, even when it seemed impossible. As the sun began to set over their new home, painting the landscape in gold and amber, Preston drew Willow close and whispered the words that had changed both their lives 5 years before. "Stay with me." Willow smiled up at him, her heart full. "Always," she promised. "Always."